Revenge is a dish best served with a side of roses. And the Ohio State Buckeyes exacted a large amount of revenge on the Oregon Ducks with an ultra-convincing quarterfinal victory at the Rose Bowl.
From Pasadena to Piscataway, College Park to the Coliseum, Seattle to State College, Columbus to Camp Randall, the Zoo to the Rock, and everywhere in between. This is where Big Ten fans gather to talk America's premier national conference with your host, Big Ten Ted. All Big Ten, all year long. This is Big Nation.
Where do we even begin with this one? The Ohio State Buckeyes absolutely dominating. The final score in this one, Ohio State 41, Oregon 21. There was a point in this game where it was not certainly that close. There's a lot of different ways I think that I can begin this commentary in reacting to this Rose Bowl in Pasadena between these two great teams. And these were, despite maybe the performance of the team that came up onto the short end of the stick in this one, these were two great teams. And I will certainly outline that as this commentary progresses. But I think here's where I want to start. And I think this is what it all comes down to. And we'll talk about mismatches, what worked and what didn't. Of course, I'm sure we'll talk more about the team that came out on the victorious end of this one. Of course, that being the Buckeyes from Columbus. But Ryan Day had his team ready to play. Ryan Day had his team with all eyes on the prize. Dan Lanning did not. Like, this is Dan Lanning is a great coach. The Oregon Ducks are in a great spot with Dan Lanning as their head coach. But this is a guy that's been a master motivator all season long. This is the program of fire, right? As we've watched all of those Ducks versus them behind the scenes documentaries this season. But this was a team that just came out flat, right? This is a team that just didn't have the energy and the pop and the punch that Ohio State did. Ohio State defensively was coming up and you could hear the pop of the pads. This was an extremely hard-hitting team. This was an extremely explosive team on the offensive side of the football for Ohio State. And they were just flat out much more ready in so many more different ways right out of the gate than their counterparts wearing green and yellow, certainly on the other side. Look, and this is not the time, folks, this is not the time to talk about the format, right? And Oregon drawing Ohio State in their first round, in their first matchup, I should say, here in the quarterfinals at the Rose Bowl. This is not, all of those things, right? This is not time to talk about the long layoff for the Oregon Ducks. And because I know some people are going to talk about that, and that's fine, but Dan Lanning kind of said during some interviews, bring one, bring them all. We'll play them in a parking lot. And they played him at the Rose Bowl on a fast track, and it certainly didn't pan out for the Oregon Ducks in this particular football game. But, yeah, this was an Ohio State team that they were just absolutely on fire. Their hair was on fire, just an utterly dominant performance by the Ohio State Buckeyes in this game. And, when you're already taking on an Oregon team or I should say an Ohio State team that has that much superior talent, or I should say that is that talented as they are. And then Oregon, we learned Evan Stewart was not able to go. He had a pregame injury. You had Jordan James, who went out early in the game. Tez Johnson was kind of in and out as this game certainly went along as well. That's not going to help anybody. Right? That's not going to help anybody, certainly. So they were maybe playing a little bit shorthanded, certainly out of the gate. There's, many ways to maybe describe this game. Bell to ass. Bell to ass for Ohio State to Oregon, right? There's not a lot of other more direct, to the point and concise ways to really describe this matchup. This was an absolute avalanche, right? Once the snow was really starting to fall down the mountain, the San Gabriel Mountains, maybe outside of the Rose Bowl, it was very difficult for Oregon to hide. They didn't have anywhere to run. They didn't have anywhere to hide. Ohio State took their first drive of this game, and they went all the way down, and they scored a touchdown in 60 seconds, in 1 minute. Just like that, it was 7-0. And it seemed like just like that, it was 14-0. And all of a sudden, points, and the goose egg remained on the scoreboard for the Oregon Ducks, and they were certainly playing out of a very deep hole at that point in time. Ohio State continued certainly what they set up in that game against the Tennessee Volunteers. That was kind of a question, right? How are they going to respond in this one going up against an Oregon Ducks team? I think that we can all agree on is a better football team than the Tennessee Volunteers, certainly. Could they keep it going? Were they going to be able to remain as explosive in this game as they were in the game against the Tennessee Volunteers? Yeah, they were pretty darn explosive. And let's talk about maybe some of those explosive plays early in this football game. Jeremiah Smith is just an absolute cheat code. Jeremiah Smith, here's the crazy thing. He has to. NCAA rules says Jeremiah Smith has to play 2 more years on campus at Ohio State or wherever he chooses to play. Of course, he's going to stay at Ohio State, not certainly suggesting something to the contrary of that, but it is utterly ridiculous that a true freshman can be this talented right out of the gate. And here's kind of the weird thing about Oregon and these specific things that I want to connect with the explosive plays. You already knew, you look at Ohio State over the course of the season, you look at Ohio State certainly last week, you knew what they were going to do most likely. You knew what they were going to attack. Oregon looked very, very confused on the back end of the defense. Their coverage looked very confused. You got to credit Chip Kelly a little bit for that, bringing guys in motion, doing a little bit of window dressing. But Jeremiah Smith, even after those plays on that first drive where he was making some explosive plays, there were plays beyond that where Jeremiah Smith continued to get open and open and open, and Kirk Herbstreit pointed that out on the broadcast, kind of the confusion that existed within that Oregon Ducks secondary, and that was certainly a problem, right? And then when like what I said with the Avalanche before, when you stack one explosive play on another explosive play, on another explosive play, you're just backpedaling, and you're backpedaling, and you're backpedaling, and you're backpedaling. All of a sudden, you look up at the scoreboard, and it's 34-0, just like that. It was staggering how much Jeremiah Smith was getting open and how often that he was getting open, certainly in that first half when they were able to extend that huge lead. Dante Manning ended up on him a few times. I noticed that. I'm like, Dante, certainly not one of the top 2 corners on the Oregon Ducks, but once again, you got to give credit to Chip Kelly from a schematic standpoint to take advantage of those matchups in the back end of the Oregon secondary as well. Let's talk about Ohio State's offensive line. When they went through those injuries, first with Josh Simmons over there at left tackle, Seth McLaughlin over there at center, I think a big talking point was how are they going to be able to patch this together? How are they going to be able to respond? Look, man, Ohio State has responded in a resounding way. This Ohio State offensive line against 2 pretty darn good fronts the last 2 weeks has responded in a big way. I think that they've played really well. Donovan Jackson over at left tackle. Of course, you got Carson Hinsman over there at center. I think that they've played really, really good football in the interior of this offensive line for the Ohio State Buckeyes. And that was a big factor coming into this one. Okay, was the Oregon defensive line going to be able to have a better showing than they did against Penn State? The answer is no. Maybe that performance by Oregon against Penn State should have been a little bit more eye-opening. And maybe it should have been looked at a little bit more as maybe a tell and maybe a sign of things to come possibly in this game against Ohio State, because Will Howard had all day to throw. There was no pressure, zero pressure on Will Howard. And if you told me before this game started, well, Will Howard's going to be able to sit back there and he's going to be able to throw the football, and he's going to be able to have his time and look wherever he wants to go with the football. You tell me that, I said, yeah, Ohio State's going to have a pretty darn good day. If Oregon can't get pressure, they're going to do pretty well. And that's exactly what happened. I kind of said it in my preview about Oregon. Hey, if their offensive line can play well, and if they can pass protect, which I was very wrong about, but if they can pass protect, right, and Dylan Gabriel's able to sit back there and throw the football, we'll talk maybe more about that here in just a little bit, then they're going to have a good day. But it certainly went the opposite way, where Ohio State's offensive line, zero question marks, certainly up front up there. I think that they are playing fantastic football at the perfect time of year up front. So they are doing a fantastic job up front of the offensive line. Oregon, they just look passive. Oregon's defensive line looked passive against Penn State, and I thought that they looked passive certainly in this game as well against Ohio State. But maybe certainly some credit, of course, goes to Ohio State and what they were able to do in this game. Now let's kind of take a look at the flip side of this one, because of course Ohio State, we could talk about the explosive plays and how good they were, and Will Howard putting the ball exactly where it needed to be, and they did a phenomenal job at that, no question. But now let's maybe flip back and let's talk about the other side of the football, where Oregon was on offense and Ohio State was on defense. Ohio State covered extremely well. Early in this game, I thought Oregon did a decent, certainly not going to say a good job, certainly not going to say a great job. Oregon did a pretty decent job in pass protection, but here was the problem. Ohio State was sticking to Oregon's receivers like freaking glue. They were fantastic back there in coverage. You didn't see the plays over the top. I know Evan Stewart had a big game back in October. He was not available for this specific game, so certainly that might factor into it as well. But you had Trayshawn Holden in this game. I know you had Tez Johnson in this game, and then you get down to maybe the Justice Lowe's of the world. But man, Ohio State was fantastic in coverage. They knew exactly, Jim Knowles knew exactly what he needed to do from a game plan perspective, and he executed it to an absolute T in this game. Great job, certainly back there in coverage. Oregon just could not run the ball, right? Ohio State, especially those two tackles up front, Tyler Williams up front, Ty Hamilton up front, certainly guys like that. They were just blowing up the middle. They were stuffing up the middle. The interior of the offensive line for Oregon was getting outmatched consistently for Ohio State. I mentioned before earlier, Jordan James went out with an injury. So now you go Noah Whittington. And I've talked about how Noah Whittington has certainly, like midway through the season, starting with that Illinois game, Whittington has done a really good job bouncing back, but he's not a back in that situation that's going to be able to create things when the interior of the offensive line is just getting eaten up for Ohio State. So Ohio State is stopping the run. They're plugging the holes, certainly in the middle. And Cody Simon had a fantastic game, double-digit tackles. He was all over the field for the Ohio State Buckeyes in this game, certainly today. So if Ohio State is plugging the run lanes up the middle, and you are just sticking to glue like secondary, sticking to the Oregon wide receivers like glue back there in the secondary. I remember so many times seeing Dylan Gabriel just sitting there and looking and looking and looking, and nobody's open. And nobody is open down the field. This is exactly how Jim Knowles certainly drew it up in a perfect world. And this first half, and of course, as we went into the second half of this game, and certainly when the clock struck 0 at the Rose Bowl, it was a pretty darn close to a perfect world, certainly, for the Ohio State Buckeyes in this game. How about Jeremiah Smith? 7 catches, 182, and 2 scores could not be covered. Will Howard, over 300 yards and 2 touchdowns. It was an utter ass whipping by the Ohio State Buckeyes, man, in this game as well. Does Ohio State owe a little bit of a thank you maybe to the team up north for lighting a fire under them, because ever since that game, this team is playing like the team that we expected at the beginning of the season. Folks, this Ohio State team, the Ohio State team that we saw against Tennessee, this Ohio State team that we saw at the Rose Bowl against the Big Ten champion, Oregon Ducks, ain't nobody can beat them. Ain't nobody can beat that team. Look at the rest of the playoff bracket. Tell me, I'm not even going to say that. I'm not even going to say who can beat this team. I'm going to say who can come within 2 touchdowns of this team. That's how confident I feel about this team right now. And there were a lot of questions coming off of that Michigan loss. How is Ryan Day going to have this team mentally? Yeah, I think the questions have certainly been answered. He's been able to refocus this football team, and he's probably certainly used that maize and blue loss as an extreme motivational factor for this team going forward as well. I talked about the offensive line. I think that's a big reason that maybe not as many people are talking about as to why this Buckeye team is as dominant as they are. We all knew of the weapons, right, of Smith, of Ibuka, of Tate, of some of these guys on this Ohio State team and how dangerous they can be. And over the course of the season, we've seen when Will Howard has time, how dangerous he can be. And when there's time, this Ohio State team can absolutely light up the scoreboard. There is absolutely nobody that is going to doubt that. I don't see, and then when you look at what Ohio State is doing defensively, when you look at how dominant they are specifically on the defensive line, like this Buckeye defensive line is going to tear apart any of the remaining offensive lines that are out there currently in all of college football. I don't see anybody left on the bracket that can move the ball on this scarlet and gray defense. I don't know if I see anybody that can block this scarlet and gray defensive line. This team is the team that we expected when it was constructed over this last offseason. This is the type of performances, and maybe at certain times this season, you look back, of course, they played pretty well against Oregon back in October, but you look at that Penn State performance, of course, you look at the loss to Michigan, you look at the performance against Nebraska. There were points and times during the season where maybe we were questioning where exactly this Ohio State team was going to be come this time of year, but they are playing like they are fulfilling all of their expectations, certainly at this point in time right now. They are humming on all cylinders, folks. I don't know how else I can say it. They dominated in the trenches. They were superior on the perimeter. And this is a team that is just completely ready to go and ready to go win their first national championship since 2014. Here's where I want to end, because I've talked about how good Ohio State is, and I could talk about it, but eventually I'd be kind of coming back into a circle. I want to end with this. I want to end talking about the Oregon Ducks. This is a tough one. Where everybody talks about the sunset and the San Gabriels and how great of a scene that certainly is, and the sun has now set on Oregon's season for 2024. And now now a lot of Duck fans are kind of sitting there, maybe in a little bit of a pit of darkness, saying, man, this happened again? We got to this point in the postseason after finally beating Washington at the end of the year. That obviously wasn't much of a challenge, but getting a big regular season game over Ohio State, going undefeated, going 13-0, getting that first round bye, and yet we come up short yet again in the postseason. I can understand the frustration. But folks, here's the deal with the Oregon Ducks. The sunset, sitting there in the darkness, The sun is going to come up tomorrow in Eugene, Oregon. The sun is going to shine once again on the Pacific Ocean across the Oregon coast. The sun is going to rise amongst the shadows of Mount Hood. The sun is going to rise. And the future still is bright for this Oregon Ducks football program. There are a lot of programs, folks. There are a lot of programs out there. For as much trash as they might talk on social media, there are a lot of programs, there are a lot of rival fan bases out there that wish they were in the position that the Oregon Ducks are sitting right now. They are in a very enviable position in all of college football. They've got to figure out a few things. They just came out flat. This was just a bad performance, certainly from start, in the middle, to finish from this Oregon Ducks football program. I don't think you should take away what this Oregon Ducks team accomplished. I know that this is going to stick out like an absolutely sore thumb, but this is a team that came into the Big Ten in year one, and they showed the type of team that they can be, winning the Big Ten championship in year number one. And where their program is right now, there's a lot to be excited about. It doesn't make it any less frustrating. It doesn't make it sting any less. But the sun's going to come up. And I think what Oregon needs to focus on right now is how do we become a truly elite team that can go up against a team like Ohio State and beat them twice? How do we become that team that can make that next step? How do we become that team? Okay, right now I don't have the answer. I'll say that right now. It's fresh off of a loss to the Ohio State Buckeyes. This is not the time where we're going to answer these questions. Okay, but there's no doubt Oregon has the resources to win a national championship. I still feel confident that the Oregon Ducks can still win a national championship under Dan Lanning. But here's the thing in the current day and age of college football. It is going to be tough to go through a Power 2 conference. It is going to be tough to go to a conference championship game. It is going to be tough to go through multiple rounds of a 12, maybe possibly a 14-team playoff in the future. This is going to be hard. These things are going to happen. These bumps in the road are going to happen. How is this program going to respond? You know Dan Lanning, the master motivator, is going to put this up on the locker room. And he is going to, and these players in this program, in theory, is going to be able to feed off of this and make their program better. But what a performance, man, from the Ohio State Buckeyes in this one. Utter domination, 41-21. They are going to advance to the semifinals, the Cotton Bowl, where they are going to be taking on the Texas Longhorns. What a Rose Bowl. What a game, man. What an absolute performance, man, from the Ohio State Buckeyes. Let's throw up some more box score action in here. 20-point victory. Jeremiah Smith, 7 catches, 187 yards, and 2 touchdowns. How about 8 sacks from Ohio State? I kind of mentioned it in my initial monologue where this was a team, like they weren't getting home. Ohio State I'm talking about. Ohio State wasn't getting home maybe as much early on in this game. Not saying, I mean, they were still doing a phenomenal job on defense. They were doing what they were supposed to do. But when this game really started to unravel a little bit, that's when Ohio State was able to get home time after time after time, and that's where you see those 8 sacks. You see the total yardage, 500 right on the button for the Ohio State Buckeyes, 276 for the Oregon Ducks in this game as well. All right, I want to get to some super chats now, and maybe we'll get to some chats here a little bit later. This from our resident Nebraska fan, going for gold 85. I know there's a lot of emotion, certainly in the chat right now, so I'm gonna be doing my best to try to balance it out and certainly answer these questions. Oregon fans claiming they had the greatest college football team ever. I'm not sure if Oregon fans were claiming that. I do appreciate the $5, sir. I think Oregon fans were maybe looking ahead that if they were able to make this run and beat Ohio State, which obviously they didn't do, beat Texas, beat someone like Georgia, make that type of run, a 16-0 team in this era, no matter who it is, I think deserves to be looked at as one of the best teams in college football history. Welcome to the Big Ten, where you have to be good week in and week out. You got to show up every single week. Especially for these big games. These layoffs have been something that we've had to deal with in college football for a long time. And this is maybe something a little bit new, right, for Dan Lanning. Because remember, last year they did play in the Pac-12 championship game against Washington. Of course, they lost, and then they played Liberty, right, the G5 rep last year, and that they could have won that game, certainly with their eyes closed. But this was kind of the first opportunity for Dan Lanning where he had the long layoff and then had a playoff type of game 3-4 weeks later, whatever it ended up being. So, and this is kind of something for a young head coach like Dan Lanning. I think he's been learning some things over the years. Remember when he first started, losses to teams like Oregon State and Washington, he was not doing very well against his rivals. And when we talk about belt to ass, in this game that Ohio State handed to Oregon, they belted to asses Oregon State and Washington certainly this year. So he's making progress in terms of that. But you got to be ready. You got to be ready. But this Ohio State team is just an absolute machine. It's a machine. I think that this is, and I talked preseason with some Oregon people, and certainly during the season with some Oregon people, this is, I think, the best team, most talented team, however you want to word it, in Oregon Ducks history. But they're going to keep on getting better, folks. They're going to keep on getting better. They're going to keep on rising through the ranks. Oregon is not going anywhere. Okay, this is not something where the Oregon Ducks just show up, they get utterly beat down, where Ohio State was clearly the better team on this day, and then they fall into 8 or 9 win seasons. That's not what's happening here. What's happening here is they didn't show up on one day. This is still a team that is acquiring elite talent. This is still a team that has elite level resources. This is still a team that is going to be in that upper echelon of the Big Ten. Ohio State's going to be there. Oregon is going to be there. Michigan is probably going to get back up there. Not saying it'll happen next year. Not saying when it will happen. But I think Michigan, obviously Penn State, they're going to be in that upper tier right now of the Big Ten Conference. Like Oregon, no doubt, they're kicking butt out there on the West Coast. When you take a look at the West Coast counterparts in the Big Ten Conference, I mean, they're beating people by a mile, right? Let's just call it as it is right now. So Oregon is in that sphere. Oregon is in that position. Now they got to take this and they got to learn how to maybe finish and put together a playoff run, certainly in the future as well. Hear from our buddy Expedition Greg. He's back in the scarlet and gray here with a win. Ohio State passes Michigan in rolls. Look at this. He's coming in with some tidbits here. I love it. I love it. With the win, Ohio State passes Michigan in Rose Bowl victories at 10. Only USC has more with 25. Man, that is quite the gap. That is quite the gap, certainly between the Trojans and the Buckeyes, certainly right now. Thank you for the $5, Expedition Greg, and congratulations to your Buckeyes and winning the Rose Bowl. Boy, I tell you what, I was dead wrong on my prediction. I'm willing to come on here and certainly talking about it, right? But you know who wasn't dead wrong on their prediction? Go into the Twitter app, go into the X app, go back to my post. A lot of Ohio State fans certainly already have. And scroll down to where Expedition Greg made his pick. He was pretty darn close. So I want to make sure that I give Expedition Greg certainly his props right now because he certainly deserves it right now as well. So thanks everybody for being here. All right, let's move on to the next thing. Let's talk bracket, right? Because I think that's now the next step for Ohio State in this journey. Here is the updated bracket. Of course, our thoughts and prayers are with everybody down there in New Orleans of the tragedy that certainly happened today, and that's why this Notre Dame-Georgia game will not be taking place tonight, and they've kind of had to restructure the schedule to ensure the safety and the security down there in New Orleans. Really looking forward to that Notre Dame-Georgia game, certainly, by the way, but I hope our main thoughts and our main priority are certainly of the safety for everybody that would be in the building. I did hear that Georgia had a shelter in place at their hotel today, so I hope everybody's going to be safe, but, kind of looking beyond that, this is how the semifinals look. Ohio State is going to go into, we'll call it enemy territory, we'll call it a road game. They go to Jerry World into Arlington to face the Texas Longhorns. I was talking about during my monologue how I thought this Ohio State team is I don't know if anybody can come within 14 points of this team. I look at the way Texas played against Arizona State today. I want to give Arizona State and Kenny Dillingham their props because holy man, do they deserve it? Do they deserve it? They played a really, really good football game here today against Texas. I haven't been overly impressed with the Texas Longhorns this year, especially a little bit later on during the season. I know a lot's been said about their defensive front, their size, their athleticism, certainly up there. But we talked about it before. Ohio State's offensive line is playing fantastic right now. Okay, so if Ohio State can keep this Texas defensive line in check, let's look to the other side. You look at offense. Quinn Ewers he's been good. He's been fine. But nothing. If I'm an Ohio State fan right now, nothing about Texas scares me. I know I'm going into Jerry World, but these are neutral sites. A bunch of Buckeyes, trust me, a bunch of Scarlet and Gray faithful are going to be in attendance, at the Cotton Bowl down there in Jerry World. So, yeah, I feel very good about the initial matchup for the Ohio State Buckeyes against the Texas Longhorns in this game. And, of course, you've got other Big Ten representation there with Penn State. I talked about them earlier today in an uploaded video as well. All right, let's hit some more Super Chats. Once again, from our guy Going for Gold 85. If it makes any Oregon fans feel any better, and folks, maybe, I know Ohio State fans won't be sending positive vibes, certainly to the West Coast in Eugene, Oregon right now, but maybe some of these other folks, maybe you need to send some positive vibes out there because rightfully so, this is a bummed fan base right now and a frustrated fan base right now. And I hope Oregon fans, they're not going to appreciate this season right now. They're not. Right? Because they're going to be focused on the pain, the anguish, the sting, just getting absolutely obliterated and ran off of the field. That's what they're going to be focusing on at this point in time. But I think as weeks go by, and once we get into February, once we get into March, maybe once this winter portal wraps up, and once we get a little bit closer to spring, I think at that point, Oregon fans are going to be able to look back and say, we did have a pretty darn big program-defining win, I guess if you can call it that, in October against what could be the eventual national champions in Ohio State. All right, we did beat Ohio State in the same year, Michigan in the same year, Penn State in the same year. The first team to do that since, I think, 2015 Michigan State. They were the first team ever to beat Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, and Michigan State all in the same year. This is a team that accomplished a lot, man. This is a team that accomplished a lot in Eugene, Oregon this season. And I know that no Oregon fan certainly wants to hear that right now, but I think eventually you're gonna maybe take that in, right? All right, as I was saying, didn't get to the rest of the comment. If it makes any Oregon fans feel better, his Going for Gold's 85, Nebraska Cornhuskers didn't even sniff the CFP. Oregon was a great team, and y'all have every right to be in the CFP. Of course they did. Undefeated Big Ten champs. They weren't a GOAT team. They were the best team, I think, in Oregon's history. But I think now they know that they have steps to climb on the ladder. And as we talked about before, you have to be ready to go every single week, every single game. You have to be there. Thanks again for the $10. Mr. Going for Gold. 85 right now. Going back to our guy, Expedition Greg. Hey, they won a national championship, Ohio State did in 2014 in the friendly confines of Jerry World over there at AT&T Stadium as well. So, hey, they're certainly familiar with that when it comes to some of these big games as well right now. Congratulations once again. If you're just joining us, congratulations to the Ohio State Buckeyes. A 41-21 victory over the Oregon Ducks. Oregon ends their season at 13-1 here when all is said and done right now as well. We've got the bracket up. Ohio State going to match up with Texas. Penn State is going to match up with the winner of the Notre Dame Fighting Irish and the Georgia Bulldogs as well. We'll go back to the box score here, and let's kind of just outline some general statistics of what certain players were able to do in this game. We talk about Dillon Gabriel. Now, I want to give credit where credit is due. The Oregon Ducks, I think, did a very good job at fighting in this game. Remember, they got that touchdown and the 2-point conversion late into the first half. And then you go into halftime, and then they get the ball coming out in the second half. And then they score again. All of a sudden, there was a little bit of hope. All of a sudden, there was a little bit of confidence right there for the Oregon Ducks at that specific moment in time. Now, Ohio State did shut it down about midway through the third quarter, and they certainly took the game back over. And they mentioned it on the broadcast, I think a big reason for that was Dillon Gabriel maybe moving the pocket a little bit and creating some plays down the field as well. Dillon Gabriel in this one, 29 of 41, just 1 yard short of 300 yards passing, 299 yards and 2 touchdowns. This was a game where this was a game where Oregon desperately needed some turnovers, but both teams certainly played a very clean game in this one as well. Expedition Greg once again chiming in saying, yeah, next year Jeremiah Smith, he could be a Heisman Trophy guy. I am so excited to be able to sit back and watch the career of Jeremiah Smith. We should all be sitting back. I know Oregon fans, right? Maybe that's a fan base that doesn't want to sit back and enjoy it right now. But a lot of people, maybe if you are a neutral observer and you're not a Duck fan, I'm sure if you're a Buckeye fan, you're obviously going to love watching Jeremiah Smith. But sit back and watch greatness, because this guy, I still don't understand how this guy played high school football last year. Can you imagine being, and he was in the state of Florida, obviously got very good talent in the state of Florida. Can you imagine being a guy across from Jeremiah Smith where, you're not going to play college football, or maybe you're going to play like D2 football, or maybe you're not going to have a scholarship and play D3 football or something like that. But yeah, you're going to play for 4 years and you're looking forward to, hey, I'm still going to play. And can you imagine lining up against Jeremiah Smith in high school less than 1 year ago? I just absolutely cannot imagine that. Like, how do you approach that, right? If you're an opposing coach, that's utter insanity, man. Utter insanity. Just the amount of talent that he has. Trevion Henderson, I think, is another guy that needs to be talked about as well. We saw him have some explosion against Tennessee and create some explosive plays in the run game as well. 8 carries, 94 yards, 2 touchdowns. He had a 66-yarder in this one. So when he's really able to get his explosiveness going in the run game, that's when this thing just, because like we've talked about the pass game, hey, pass protection, Will Howard when he's got time. Like we've talked about all those dots being connected in the throw game. But now you factor in Trevion Henderson, who throughout his Ohio State career, he's been a little bit banged up. All right, he's been a little bit in and out of the lineup over the course of his time. But man, when he is healthy, he is as explosive as it gets in the run game. Quinshon Judkins, 17 carries, 85 yards. He had a long rush of 18 yards in this game. So he was, maybe did not have the explosive run that Trevion did, but obviously certainly was a big part in this run game. We talked about Jeremiah Smith before. 7 catches, 182, and 2 scores. That's on the graphic here. He had a long of 45. Emeka Ibuka had a long catch of 42 yards in this game. 5 catches, 72 yards. And a score. G. Scott Jr. is somebody that interests me for Ohio State. Coming into this season, I remember talking to some Ohio State people before the season. Dan Hope of 11 Warriors is the reporter that I had for my Ohio State preview. I remember talking to him, and tight end was a little bit, maybe not as good as maybe previous years. We'll see how G. Scott Jr. Certainly fills into the fold. But man, really, as we've gotten later in the season for Ohio State, he's become a much bigger part of this past game. As if they needed more weapons. There's another one certainly sitting out there for the Ohio State Buckeyes. So if you're Texas's defense, and we'll see if they advance and play in the national championship, but if you're any of those teams, you got to watch out for G. Scott Jr. right now. So that's something certainly to keep an eye on going forward. Like, he only had 1 catch, but he's certainly been coming into his own. I talked about Cody Simon before. 11 tackles. He had 7 solo tackles. How about 2 sacks and 3 tackles for loss? I just look up and down this. I'm looking at the box score right now. I look up and down at these defensive players. It's sorted by tackles. Cody Simon, Lathan Ransom, Jordan Hancock, Davison Igbenogson, Sonny Styles, JTT, Tyler Williams, Ty Hamilton, Caleb Downs, Jack Sawyer, Denzel Burke. Like, these are all fantastic football players, and we knew how loaded this defense was and what exactly they were all bringing back. But, man, you see it on a box score, you see it on a stat sheet, and then you kind of connect that with the dominant performance that we saw in the Rose Bowl. Just utter insanity, man, throughout this game and throughout this season, really, as well for the Ohio State Buckeyes. Trayshawn Holden for Oregon, 7 catches, 116, and 2 touchdowns. A lot of that, of course, was in the second half. Do you want to call it garbage time? You can certainly call it a comeback time, an attempted comeback time, certainly for Oregon as well. Terrence Ferguson, I thought, came up with some big catches to keep drives moving and to keep the sticks moving as well. 5 catches for 71. But when you have Tez Johnson, we know and once again, him being a little bit banged up in this one, I think was a big key. Does it change the result of the game? I don't think there's many things. If Evan Stewart is healthy, if Jordan James can go 60 minutes, is Tez Johnson, all these, like, if they're all healthy, does that change anything? No, I don't think that changes anything. I think Ohio State is just an absolute juggernaut. They're an absolute machine. Maybe it makes it a little bit closer, but I don't think it makes a difference in who's going to Jerry World and who's not when all is said and done as well. When I look at this box score and I see Kenyon Sadiq, 1 catches for 10 yards, that really pops out to me. I didn't really talk about it in my preview. I did talk about it in the preview of the October 12th game, but I didn't talk about it in this specific preview. But I thought the tight ends is maybe something that Oregon could exploit in the middle of the field, possibly. Like I said, Ferguson had a pretty good game, but Sadiq certainly didn't get a whole lot of targets in this game as well. Boy, you look at running the football for the Oregon Ducks. Jordan James, 7 carries, 14 yards. Now, Dylan Gabriel, negative 43 yards. Of course, when you get sacked as many times as he did, that certainly plays into a factor. When all is said and done, 28 carries, minus 23 yards. But you look at Oregon, if you take out Dylan Gabriel's rushing numbers in this game, James 7 for 14, Jade Lamar 2 for 4, Noah Whittington 6 carries for 3 yards. I mean, you're looking at what? I'm trying to do math on the fly. 20 yards rushing? You tell me before this game starts, Oregon rushes for 20 yards. I say, they're not going to win. And I think that's pretty safe to say. And I think that is pretty safe to say, certainly right there. But it's just, it's just one of those days. Everything went wrong for the Oregon Ducks. Some key players weren't available. Ohio State they're just hitting their stride at the right time. And that's about all you can say, right? I'm excited to see exactly how much better can this Ohio State team get, right? As we continue to progress throughout this thing. That's what I'm really excited to see. Is, can this team get better? What can they do better? Like, if I'm looking at this Rose Bowl game and I'm trying to think, and if I'm head coach Ryan Day, for example, and I got to give credit to Ryan Day, man, there was Jack Sawyer wanted to celebrate with him on the sideline, and I forgot who else was with Jack there, but they wanted to celebrate a little bit later when this game was in the fourth quarter. But he was still coaching in a 20-point game. It was 41-21, and of course that's what the final score ended up being. But he was still coaching at that point in time. He was still certainly getting on his players. So you got to certainly give him credit for that. But yeah, I'm excited. So what I'm trying to circle back to is, what can he improve on? If I'm looking at this game against the Oregon Ducks, they pitched pretty much close to a perfect game. I honestly don't know. I mean, could they have gotten home a few more times with their pass rush earlier in this game? Yeah, they could have. But when you've got the coverage as blanketed and as glued on these Oregon receivers as it was, I think you're doing just fine. Played well against the run, played well against the pass, created explosive plays, ran the football as good as they needed to do. This is an Ohio State program they're just playing at their ceiling right now. They are playing at their top potential. And I'm going to put the bracket up again. I want to ask you a question out there. You see a team here that can come close to the Ohio State Buckeyes? I don't. Texas, who they're going to match up against? I don't see that. Penn State? Well, I talked about earlier in the day, Penn State's like, if we see a Penn State and Ohio State matchup, for example, in a national championship game, Penn State's got to get better at a lot of stuff, right? At a lot of stuff. Drew Aller's got to be better at throwing the football down the field. This secondary has to be better, right? The Penn State secondary gave up over 300 yards to Boise State last night. And, with all due respect to folks like former Indiana Hoosier wide receiver Cam Camper, Ohio State's a little bit different. Jeremiah Smith is a little bit different. Emeka Egbuka is a little bit different. Okay, so, I don't think Penn State, everybody talks about their route defeating SMU and defeating Boise State. I think Ohio State is playing A+ football right now. I think Penn State is playing B+ football, I think, as an overall football team right now. We'll see where, it's hard to evaluate exactly where Notre Dame and Georgia certainly are playing, but that'll be something that we will certainly see tomorrow night as well. So that wraps up this Rose Bowl coverage. And what a Rose Bowl it was, certainly, for the Ohio State Buckeyes. I'm going to be having previews of both semifinals since we know there's going to be Big Ten teams in both semifinals. We're going to have coverages of that. We're going to have previews of that. Maybe we'll bring in some reporters from both of these teams to break down these specific games as well. So it's all going to be on the channel. Follow on X if you haven't already. Got all kinds of updates certainly over there as well. So thanks everybody for tuning in here to the show tonight. Oregon fans, the sun will rise tomorrow. Ohio State, the sun is shining brighter than it ever has been. Michigan, who? What happened there? They are moving on. Their thoughts are on bigger and better things. Their focus is laser focused on a national championship, and I'm not sure if anybody can beat the Ohio State Buckeyes right now. So, until next time, I'm Big Ten Ted. We'll see you in the next one.
Thank you for watching and listening to Big Nation. Make sure to subscribe and follow Big Ten Ted on X, YouTube, and podcast platforms to stay in the know on all things Big Ten football.